The noose swung gently in the morning wind, creaking against the beam of the weathered porch. The sun had barely risen above the horizon, spilling its pale light over the small frontier town. Dust swirled between boots, whispers spread like dry grass fire, and eyes hard. Judgmental eyes fixed on the frail woman clutching a newborn to her chest. Her face was pale, streaked with sweat and tears, her long, dark hair tangled from labor that had ended just minutes ago. The baby whimpered softly, its fragile cry swallowed by the murmurs of the gathered crowd. She didn't beg, not anymore. She had done that all night, pleaded for her life, for her child's life, for mercy that never came. Now she only held the baby close, rocking slightly as if the movement might somehow shield it from what was about to happen. Her dress, torn and stained, stuck to her trembling body. The rope hung in front of her face like a cruel promise. A deputy spat into the dirt. "It's time," he muttered. The crowd shifted, boots scraping, guns hanging heavy from belts. Men in dust-coated coats and women with shawls pulled tight stood together, some curious, others eager to see justice, as they called it. The sheriff stood on the porch, his hand near his revolver, though he knew he wouldn't need it. His voice carried across the tense silence. "She's guilty by her own doing. She brought that child into this world through lies and blood. The law says she pays." The woman's lips moved, but no sound came. She had no strength left. Only the faint movement of her thumb over the baby's cheek showed. She was still alive. A sudden gust lifted the smell of smoke and horses. From beyond the street came the distant sound of hooves, heavy and fast. People turned. The sheriff frowned and raised a hand to shade his eyes. The riders appeared from behind the ridge, a blur of dust and motion, horses pounding the earth like thunder. Fear rippled through the crowd. Someone shouted, "Indians!" Guns were drawn, mothers clutched their children, men took cover behind barrels and wagons. The tension cracked like a whip. The woman didn't move. She didn't flinch. She just held the baby tighter. The first rider broke through the dust, a towering figure painted with streaks of ash and clay, his chest bare, his long black hair streaming behind him. Around his neck hung tribal jewelry that glimmered in the sunlight. His face carried the fury of a storm. Behind him, others followed, but it was clear from the way he rode, from the way he looked straight at her, that this was no random attack. He was coming for her. The sheriff shouted, "Hold your fire!" But panic had already taken hold. A shot rang out, then another. The sound of gunfire echoed through the street. Horses reared, people screamed, and the hanging platform shook under her feet. The warrior leapt from his horse before it had even stopped, rolling through the dust and rising with a knife in his hand. His eyes locked on the woman as he charged through the chaos. A man tried to block his way. He didn't live long enough to regret it. The woman's vision blurred. The world around her seemed to slow, each second stretching painfully long. The noose was looped. The sheriff's hand reached for the lever, and her baby's cry broke through the noise like a knife through cloth. In that moment, she thought of how she had come to this place, how one wrong step, one cruel lie, one desperate decision had led her here. She had crossed plains, hidden in barns, worked for scraps, and trusted people she shouldn't have. She had known the man who now ran toward Hertha, one whose eyes she could never forget. Once, he had saved her. Once, he had sworn he would never let anyone harm her again, and yet, here she was. The platform shook again as someone stumbled onto it. The sheriff raised his voice over the chaos. "Cut her down. No, wait." He didn't know what to do anymore. The warrior's roar filled the air as he reached the steps. His knife flashed in the light, cutting through rope and resistance alike. Bullets whizzed past him, striking the wood, sending splinters into the air. He ignored them all. His only focus was her. The woman felt the rough rope scrape her neck as it loosened, then fell away completely. She collapsed to her knees, clutching her child so tightly it whimpered in pain. Her breath came in sharp, uneven gasps. She looked up, dazed, as the man she once thought she'd never see again grabbed her arm and pulled her toward him. "Move," he shouted, his voice deep and urgent. She stared at him, unable to speak. He pulled her close. shielding her from the chaos as gunfire roared again. His body tensed with every shot, but he didn't stop. He looked back only once to meet the eyes of the sheriff, who stood frozen. Unable to act, they ran through the alley between two buildings, the sounds of war filling the town behind them. The warrior held her hand as though letting go meant death. The baby cried softly against her chest, unaware of the danger that surrounded them. When they reached the edge of town, horses waited, his people guarding them, their faces grim. He lifted her onto the horse, his movements fast but gentle. The child pressed against her, its tiny fingers curling around a lock of her hair. She looked at him again, finally finding her voice. "Why?" she whispered. "After everything." His gaze softened, the anger fading for a moment. "Because I made a promise," he said. Before she could answer, shouts came from behind. The sheriff's men were regrouping, and the sound of galloping horses grew louder. He swung onto the horse beside her, motioning for his people to move. They rode hard through the valley, dust rising in their wake. The woman looked back once, seeing the town growing smaller, the gallows fading into the distance. She didn't know where he was taking her or what waited beyond the hills. She only knew that she was alive and that the man beside her had risked everything to make it so. The wind caught her hair as they rode, whipping it across her face. The baby's cries softened into silence, and she felt its tiny heartbeat against her chest. The warrior's voice reached her through the wind. "You're not safe yet," he said. "Then where are we going?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. His jaw tightened, and his eyes stayed on the path ahead. Finally, he said, "Home, but not the one you remember." The sun sank lower, painting the plains in red and gold. Behind them, the town burned. Ahead, the wild stretched endless and uncertain. The woman glanced at the man beside Hertha, one who had ripped through the crowd, who had defied the world for her and wondered what kind of fate tied them together so fiercely. She didn't know that the hardest part was yet to come, and as they disappeared into the horizon, the noose still swayed gently in the wind behind them, waiting like a shadow that refused to let go. The wind howled across the open plains as they rode deeper into the wilderness, leaving behind the smoke of the town that had nearly taken her life. The woman held the baby close, feeling its warmth against her chest, her arms aching but unwilling to let go. Every jolt of the horse sent pain through her body, but she bit her lip and stayed silent. The man beside her rode tall and alert, scanning the horizon as though danger hid behind every rock and shadow. His bare chest was streaked with dust and sweat, his long black hair whipping in the wind. Around his neck hung the same tribal jewelry she remembered from years ago. Symbols she once didn't understand, but had come to trust. He slowed his horse and motioned for her to follow. The others behind them, his people, fanned out quietly, their eyes sharp and movements disciplined. When they finally stopped near a cluster of red rocks overlooking a shallow stream, he dismounted first and reached for her. She hesitated, then allowed him to lift her down. Her legs barely held her weight. She sank to the ground, clutching the baby as if afraid someone would still come to take it. He crouched beside her, his voice low. "You're safe here for now. Rest." Safe. The word felt heavy, almost foreign. She looked up at him, her breathing still uneven. "Why did they want me dead?" she asked, her voice weak. His eyes darkened. "Because you gave birth to truth they couldn't hide," he said. Then he stood and walked toward the stream, rinsing his hands clean of blood and dust. Her mind drifted back to the days before the gallows, the nights of fear. The stairs, the whispers behind her back. She had lived on the edge of that small town for nearly a year, working for food, keeping her head down, and hiding the growing secret inside her. No one had believed her story. They said she was lying, that her child was born of sin, that she had betrayed her own kind by loving someone from the tribes they called enemies. When she tried to tell them about the night her home burned and how he had saved her from the raiders, they laughed. In their eyes, love between a frontier woman and a tribal warrior was nothing but a curse. She remembered that night, clearly the night he found her. The sky had been thick with smoke, her husband gone, her farm destroyed. She had stumbled through the darkness, coughing, crying for help. And out of that darkness he had appeared, leading his horse slowly toward her, his face lit by firelight. He hadn't spoken at first, only lifted her into his arms when she collapsed. He had carried her across miles of barren land until dawn, tending to her wounds and giving her water when she woke. For days they traveled together, saying little, but each day she felt something in his presence, a strength she couldn't explain, a quiet that made her heart ache. When they reached the safety of a hidden valley, she realized she no longer feared him. He wasn't the monster the townspeople spoke of. He was scarred and proud, but there was kindness beneath that hard exterior. He had lost people too, just like her. But peace never lasted long on that land. The men from the town tracked her down months later, accusing her of being with him, of helping the enemy. When they found she was with child, they didn't care for the truth. To them, she had betrayed her own blood. She blinked, her eyes returning to the present as she looked at the baby sleeping in her arms. They said he wouldn't survive, she whispered. They said he was cursed. The warrior turned to her, his face calm but his eyes burning with emotion. No child is cursed. Only the hearts that judge are, he said quietly. The sun began to sink behind the rocks, turning the sky into shades of gold and crimson. His people moved with quiet efficiency, setting small fires and preparing food. The scent of roasted meat filled the air, but she couldn't eat. Her stomach twisted with fear and exhaustion. When night fell, the sounds of the wilderness surrounded them, the crackle of fire, the call of coyotes in the distance, the soft murmur of his people speaking in their tongue. She sat near the flames, watching the man across from her. He was sharpening a knife, the same one he had used to cut the rope that nearly ended her life. His face was unreadable, his posture strong but weary. Finally, she spoke again. You knew they would hang me, he nodded. I heard 2 days ago. The one who sentenced you was the same man who led the raid on my village years ago. Her chest tightened. Then this was revenge? He looked up, meeting her gaze. No, this was justice. She didn't understand, not fully. But she could feel the weight of something deeper in his voice, pain that went beyond her story. She wanted to ask more, but fear held her tongue. The fire crackled between them, painting shadows on his face. The baby stirred, and she hummed softly, rocking it back to sleep. He watched her quietly, his expression softening as the child's tiny fingers curled around her dress. You named him? He asked. She shook her head. Not yet. I wanted his father to name him, she said quietly, then looked at him, her voice trembling. But he's gone. The man's eyes lowered to the fire. Maybe not in the way you think, he murmured. She frowned, unsure what he meant. The flames flickered in his dark eyes, and she sensed there was more to his silence than he was willing to say. As the night deepened, moved closer to the fire and spoke in a low voice. Before you came to that town, there was a promise made between two worlds. One broken by blood, the other by lies. You were caught between them. She stared at him, her heart pounding. Why me? Because you carry something both sides fear a bridge they can't destroy, he replied. His words hung in the air like smoke. She didn't know whether to believe him or be terrified by them. Far in the distance, thunder rolled. The wind grew colder, sweeping across the camp. He rose to his feet, looking toward the horizon. They'll come after us, he said. They won't stop until they have you or what they think belongs to them. She stood too, clutching the baby tighter. Then what are we going to do? He turned to her, his expression fierce. We ride before dawn. There's a place across the canyon where they won't follow. You'll be safe there. She shook her head. Safe. There's no such thing anymore. He stepped closer, his voice calm but firm. You trusted me once when everything was burning. Trust me again now. The memory of that night flickered in her mind, the way he had lifted her from the ashes, the way he had carried her when she couldn't walk. She looked up at him, her fear slowly giving way to something else, something stronger. All right, she whispered. I'll trust you. He gave a small nod and turned back to the fire. The flames cast long shadows that danced across the rocks, painting their faces in gold and crimson. The night stretched around them, heavy with secrets neither dared to speak as the camp quieted. She lay down beside the baby, listening to its soft breathing. But sleep didn't come. Her mind churned with questions: the past, the man beside her, the future that seemed to hang by a thread. Somewhere deep down, she knew this wasn't over. The world behind them had already decided her fate once. It wouldn't rest until it finished the job. She turned her head slightly and saw him sitting still as stone, his gaze fixed on the darkness beyond the firelight. His hand rested on the knife again, ready. For all his calm, she could sense the storm brewing inside him. The baby whimpered softly. She whispered, "You'll live. I promise you'll live." He looked toward her then, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he said quietly, "Promises can be dangerous things." She met his eyes across the fire. "So can love," she said. He didn't answer, but his gaze lingered on her for a moment before drifting back to the night. The fire cracked, the wind moaned through the rocks, and somewhere far away, the faint echo of horses carried on the breeze. The woman's pulse quickened. "They're coming," she whispered. He didn't move right away. Then, slowly he stood, his shadow stretching long behind him. "Then we ride sooner than planned." The flames flickered once more, and in that brief light, she saw what she hadn't before: the mark burned into the side of his arm. The same symbol she'd seen once in the ruins of her old home. The past was not gone. It was riding toward them, and this time, no one would be spared. The sound of hoofbeats echoed faintly in the distance as the wind swept across the canyon. The warrior stood still, his hand resting on the hilt of his knife, eyes fixed on the dark horizon. The woman, cradling the baby, could see the unease in his stance, even though he said nothing. The night had fallen heavy, the sky dim with storm clouds rolling in from the west. The air smelled of rain and gunpowder, and the faint glow of fire still lingered far behind them, remnants of the town they had fled. He turned to her quietly. "They're not far," he said. "They're riding hard." She tightened her grip on the child. "Then we should go now." "Not yet," he replied. "They'll follow the river trail. We take the ridge." His people moved silently, preparing their horses and wrapping their supplies. These were not men of war by choice. They were survivors' families, hunters, women carrying baskets of dried roots, young warriors with haunted eyes. They followed him without question, the respect they held for him clear in every small movement. The woman noticed how they looked at her, not with hate, but with wary curiosity. She was not one of them, yet she carried something precious, something that tied her fate to theirs. The baby stirred again, small cries echoing in the night. She hushed it softly, whispering words only a mother could understand, as they began their climb toward the ridge. The path grew steeper and colder. The rocks were slick, the horses uneasy. He led from the front, steady and unflinching, even when the wind cut through the canyon like a blade. She followed closely, her strength fading with every step. The pain from childbirth still burned in her body, and exhaustion blurred her vision, but she refused to stop. She had come too far to give up now. When they reached the top, dawn was breaking faintly through the storm clouds. The warrior raised a hand, signaling the group to stop. From up there, the valley stretched wide and empty, a lonely expanse of wilderness that seemed endless. He crouched low, scanning the land below. A thin line of riders was moving through the lower pass, too organized to be bandits. "They're tracking us," he said under his breath. "Are they from the town?" she asked. "Not just them," he answered. "The men with them wear blue coats. Soldiers." Her heart skipped. Soldiers meant something worse than revenge. It meant orders, laws, and no mercy. "Why would soldiers chase us?" she asked. He looked at her, his face hard. "Because you are proof that their lies can't last." She didn't understand, but his words carried a weight that chilled her more than the wind. He motioned for the group to move again, leading them down the far side of the ridge where narrow cliffs and dense brush offered cover. By midday, they reached a hidden clearing near a stream. The warriors spread out to keep watch while the others rested. The woman sank to her knees beside the water, washing her face and the baby's small hands. The cold water soothed her, though fear still clawed at her chest. The warrior crouched beside her. "They'll reach the ridge by nightfall," he said. "We'll move again before dusk." She looked at him, her voice trembling. "You said there's a place they won't follow. Where is it?" He hesitated, then answered quietly. "The Valley of Shadows. It's sacred to my people. Soldiers don't go there. They call it cursed." "Cursed. Only to those who don't understand," he said, his tone calm but guarded. "For us, it's where our ancestors still walk." As the hours passed, the woman began to see more of the world he came from, the quiet discipline of his people, the way they treated the land with respect, the soft songs they hummed while working. There was pain in their faces, but also pride, a sense of belonging she had never known. For the first time, she wondered if this place, the one they called cursed, was perhaps the only home left for her and her child. But beneath that fragile calm, danger was still moving. At sunset, one of the scouts returned with urgent news. "They've split," he said. "Half the riders are following the river. The rest are heading toward the ridge. They'll cut us off by morning." The warrior's jaw tightened. "They're faster than I thought." He looked at the woman, then to his people. "We ride through the night," he ordered. No fires. No sound. The journey that night was grueling. The moon hid behind clouds, and the wind carried the smell of rain and gunpowder again. The woman could barely keep her eyes open. She leaned against him as they rode, her baby pressed between them. Every few minutes he would glance back, scanning the shadows. At one point, he slowed his horse and whispered to her, "If we're separated, keep riding west. Follow the stars until the land turns red. You'll find the valley there." She shook her head. "No, I won't leave you." "You might have to," he said. She looked up at him through the darkness. "You saved my life twice. Don't ask me to run from you." For a moment he said nothing. Then his hand brushed the child's small head. "Then we ride together," he said softly. By dawn, rain began to fall, cold and heavy. The trail turned to mud, slowing them down. The baby started crying, its voice weak but desperate. She tried to soothe it, her hands shaking. The warrior stopped and handed her his cloak, wrapping it around both of them. They pressed on, but when the first gunshot echoed through the storm, everyone froze. The warrior spun his horse around, eyes narrowing. A second shot followed, closer this time. "Go." He shouted to the others, "Get 'em to the valley." He stayed behind with a few of his men, taking cover behind the rocks. The woman's horse was pulled forward by another rider as the group split apart, vanishing into the rain. She could hear shouting, the clash of metal, and the terrifying cry of wounded horses. Her heart pounded as she looked back. Searching for him through the sheets of rain, a flash of lightning revealed him briefly fighting, his knife gleaming, his hair soaked and wild. Then the darkness swallowed him again. The rider pulling her horse yelled, "Don't look back." But she couldn't help it. Even through the chaos, even through the fear, her eyes searched for him. The baby whimpered softly against her chest, unaware of the storm that raged around them. They rode hard for hours until the sound of battle faded behind them. When they finally stopped near a cluster of ancient rocks, she slid from the horse, her knees hitting the wet ground. The baby cried again, its small voice echoing through the canyon. One of the women from the tribe knelt beside her. "He'll come," she said gently, though her eyes were filled with worry. "He always does." The woman nodded weakly, clutching her child as thunder rolled above them. She wanted to believe those words. But the fear in her heart grew heavier with each passing moment. Night came again, and still he didn't return. The rain slowed, and the fires of pursuit disappeared from the horizon. She sat beneath a rock ledge, the baby sleeping against her, and stared into the darkness beyond. She thought about everything that had brought her here, the fire that destroyed her home, the town that turned against her, the man who had risked everything to save her. There were questions that haunted her still. Why did he call her child a bridge between two worlds? What truth was she carrying that frightened them all so much? Somewhere beyond the ridge, lightning flashed again, lighting up the distant plains for a brief moment, and in that flash, she thought she saw movement. A lone rider, drenched in rain, moving slowly toward them, her breath caught. Her heart pounding, but she didn't know yet whether it was him or someone coming to finish what the town had started. The rain had stopped by the time dawn touched the edge of the canyon, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than the night itself. Mist rose from the wet ground, curling between the rocks like breath from a sleeping giant. The woman sat huddled under a ledge, the baby warm against her chest, her eyes fixed on the figure in the distance. The lone rider was drawing closer, moving slow but steady. Every beat of her heart thudded in her ears as she waited to see his face. When he finally emerged from the fog, her breath caught. His horse was wounded, his arm streaked with blood, but it was him. The warrior rode straight to her, dismounted without a word, and fell to one knee. His people rushed to help, steadying him as he struggled to stay upright. She reached for him, her hands trembling. "You're hurt." She whispered. "I'm alive," he said, his voice rough. "That's enough." He turned his gaze to the horizon where smoke still rose faintly. "They won't stop now. They've seen your face, your child. To them, you're a sign of what they fear most, a bond they can't break." She wanted to ask what that truly meant, but before she could, one of the scouts approached quickly. Speaking in the tribal tongue, the warrior's expression hardened as he listened. Then he looked at her. "They're coming again. Twice as many this time. They've brought trackers." Her heart sank. "Then there's nowhere left to go." "There is," he said, glancing toward the mountains beyond the canyon. "The Valley of Shadows is close. Once we cross, they can't follow without losing themselves." The group moved fast, packing what little they had. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of smoke again. The baby began to cry softly, sensing the tension around them. The woman tried to calm him, whispering gently, but the child's cries only grew louder. The warrior placed a hand on her shoulder. "Keep him close. The valley tests the heart. Don't listen to what it whispers." She didn't understand what he meant, but his tone left no room for questions. They rode through the narrow canyon as daylight faded behind the clouds. The path grew steeper, and the air turned strange, thicker, heavier, almost humming with energy. The woman looked around uneasily. The rocks seemed to shift in the corner of her eyes, shadows twisting into shapes she couldn't name. The others rode silently, eyes fixed forward, as they climbed higher. Thunder rumbled in the distance again, and the sound of pursuing horses echoed faintly behind them. The warrior looked back, his face tense. "They're closer than I thought." He urged the group faster, but the path narrowed sharply ahead, forcing them into single file. The woman's horse stumbled on the slick stones, and she gripped the reins tight, her knuckles white. The baby whimpered again. Suddenly a shot cracked through the air. The sound bounced off the canyon walls like thunder. One of the riders cried out and fell from his horse. Panic spread through the group as more shots followed. The woman ducked low, shielding her child. The warrior spun his horse around, shouting orders in his native tongue. His people took defensive positions among the rocks, turning fire with arrows that cut through the mist. He turned to her, his voice sharp and urgent. "Go. Ride with the others to the pass. Don't stop until you see the red cliffs." "I'm not leaving you," she said, clutching the reins. He met her eyes, fierce and unwavering. "You have to. That child carries both our worlds. If you stay, neither will survive." Tears blurred her vision, but she nodded. "You promised you'd find me again." "I will," he said, and with a quick movement, slapped the horse's flank. The animal bolted forward, carrying her away as the battle raged behind. The path twisted sharply, and the storm broke again, pouring rain down in heavy sheets. She could barely see, her hair plastered to her face, her arms shaking as she held the baby close. The cliffs loomed ahead, glowing faintly red under the lightning. She pushed the horse forward, every heartbeat echoing with fear. Behind her, the gunfire faded, replaced by the distant roar of thunder. She didn't know if he was alive, if his people had survived, or if the soldiers were still chasing her. The valley opened before her like a wound in the earth, vast and dark. She hesitated at its edge, her instincts screaming to turn back, but his voice echoed in her mind, "Trust me again." Now she crossed. The air inside the valley was unlike anything she had known. The rain stopped the moment she entered, though the clouds still hung low. The silence was deep, almost alive. The ground was soft, covered in moss and strange glowing plants that shimmered faintly in the dim light. The baby stirred, but did not cry. She dismounted and looked around. The landscape was hauntingly beautiful, but there was something unsettling beneath its peace. The shadows seemed to move, whispering faintly, voices she couldn't quite understand. She held the child tighter. "Just hold on," she whispered. "He'll find us." The hours passed slowly. She found a small alcove among the rocks and took shelter there. The baby slept, his breathing soft and steady. Exhaustion began to pull her under, but just as she started to drift, she heard something, a faint echo of footsteps. She tensed, listening. Out of the mist, a figure appeared. For a brief moment, hope surged in her chest. But as he came closer, she realized it wasn't him. It was one of the soldiers. His coat was torn, his face streaked with dirt, but his gun was steady in his hands. He spotted her immediately. "Stop right there," he shouted. She froze, holding the baby protectively. The soldier stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "That's the woman. The one they were looking for." He raised his gun. "Hand over the child." "No," she whispered. He took another step. "That baby doesn't belong to you. You've brought shame on both sides. The colonel wants the proof destroyed." Her heart pounded. She backed away slowly, her heel pressing against the rock wall. The soldier aimed, finger tightening on the trigger, but before he could fire, a shadow moved behind him. The sound was swift, a knife slicing through air, a dull thud. The soldier dropped to his knees, shock in his eyes before he fell face first into the earth. The warrior stood behind him, breathing hard, rain still dripping from his hair. His chest rose and fell with exhaustion, but his eyes burned with the same fire she remembered. "You said you'd find me." She breathed. "I never break a promise," he said. He knelt beside her, his hand brushing the baby's small head. "Is he safe?" She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "He's strong." The warrior stood, scanning the shadows. "We can't stay here long. The valley hides us for now, but if they come this far, the spirits will turn against them." She looked at him, fear and relief tangled inside her. "Will we ever be free?" He met her gaze quietly. "Freedom is not given. It's taken one breath at a time." Lightning flashed across the valley again, revealing dark figures gathering at its edge. The soldiers had found the entrance. The woman gasped, clutching the baby as the warrior drew his knife and raised his voice to his people, who had followed him from the battle. They appeared from the mist, faces painted, weapons drawn, ready to defend what remained of their world. The air grew thick with tension, the valley echoing with the sound of thunder and approaching horses. The woman looked from the child in her arms to the man who had saved her twice. Knowing the next few moments would decide everything, life, death, and the fragile bridge between two worlds, he turned to her, voice steady but filled with urgency. "No matter what happens, keep moving forward. Don't look back." She wanted to speak, to tell him she couldn't leave him again, but before she could, the first shout came from the canyon. The soldiers charged through the mist, rifles raised, and the valley erupted in chaos. The warrior ran toward the fight, his body a blur of strength and fury, while she clutched her baby and fled deeper into the glowing shadows. The cries of battle echoed through the valley, the clash of two worlds meeting under a storm that refused to end, and somewhere in that storm, she felt it, the pull of destiny tightening around them both, leading them toward the moment that would decide everything. The valley burned with noise and fury as thunder crashed above the mountains. The woman ran through the glowing mist, clutching her child to her chest, her heart pounding in rhythm with the chaos behind her. The cries of battle echoed against the stone, the clash of metal and shouts of men filling the sacred place that was never meant to hold such violence. She stumbled over roots and stones, every instinct urging her to keep moving, to reach the heart of the valley, where he said she would be safe. Behind her, the warrior fought like the storm itself, every movement powerful and sure. His blade caught the light of the lightning, cries calling to his people as they held the line against the soldiers pushing through the fog. He had seen death many times, but never had he fought with such fire. This was not just another battle. This was his promise. The woman could hear the sounds of gunfire fading and returning like waves crashing and retreating. She pressed onward, crossing a stream that shimmered faintly beneath her feet. The baby whimpered, frightened by the thunder, but she whispered softly, "Almost there. Just hold on." Her voice shook with exhaustion and fear, but also with something new determination. When she reached the heart of the valley, the land opened into a vast circle surrounded by towering stone walls. Strange lights shimmered from cracks in the rock like fire trapped beneath the earth. The air was warmer here, calmer, though still heavy with energy. She collapsed to her knees near a smooth stone carved with ancient markings. She had no idea what they meant, but somehow she felt drawn to it. Her breath came fast, her body trembling. She looked at the child, then toward the direction of the fight. "Come back to me," she whispered, tears mixing with rain. "You said we'd be free together." The sound of hooves reached her ears again, and for a moment her heart stopped. Shapes moved through the mist, first dark, then clear. The soldiers were entering the valley. She backed away, clutching the baby, her mind racing for a place to hide. But then something strange happened. As the first man stepped onto the sacred ground, the light from the stones pulsed, deep and strong, like a heartbeat. The soldier froze. The air thickened around him, and the mist swirled violently. The ground trembled, a low hum rising from beneath. He tried to raise his weapon, but before he could, the light flared, and he was thrown back as though struck by invisible force. His body hit the ground, unmoving. The others hesitated, fear flickering in their eyes. The valley was defending itself. From the shadows, the warrior appeared, bloodied, but still standing. His people followed, fewer now, but their spirit unbroken. He saw her across the clearing, her figure small yet fierce, holding the child like a shield of love. Their eyes met through the mist, and in that silent look, everything they had fought for was understood. He raised his hand and gave a sharp cry, his people answering in unison. The valley seemed to echo their voices, the earth itself rising in protest against the intruders. Thunder roared once more, and lightning struck the ground between the two forces. Separating them with blinding light, the soldiers stumbled back, shouting to retreat, but some still tried to push forward. They fired into the mist, blind and desperate. The warrior charged, cutting through their ranks with strength, fueled by rage and love. The woman wanted to run to him, but she couldn't move. Her legs wouldn't obey. She could only watch as the battle reached its peak. Finally, the leader of the soldiers, a man with a silver badge and a cold gaze, stepped forward. His gun was aimed not at the warrior, but at her. "Enough," he shouted. "The woman dies, and this ends." The warrior froze when he saw the gun pointing at her. For a heartbeat, time itself seemed to stop. She clutched her child tighter, tears spilling freely. The soldier took aim. The warrior dropped his knife and raised his hand slowly, stepping between them. His voice was calm, steady. "Take me instead. The fight is with me," the soldier sneered. "No, you die watching her." He pulled the trigger, but the shot never reached her. The valley itself answered. The air split with a deafening crack, and the wind howled like a living thing. A wave of light burst from the stones, knocking every soldier to the ground. The gun flew from the man's hand, shattering against the rocks. The warrior ran to her, grabbing her before she fell. The light dimmed slowly, leaving only rain and silence behind. The soldiers fled, those who survived stumbling out of the valley, too terrified to look back. The valley had chosen its side. When the storm finally quieted, he held her close, both trembling and breathless. The baby began to cry softly, and the sound seemed to break through the weight of what had just happened. The warrior brushed his hand through her hair, his voice low and warm. "It's over." She looked up at him through tears. "Is it really?" He nodded. "They won't return. The land has seen to that." For a long while, neither spoke. The rain turned gentle, the mist fading into soft gray light. The valley, once wild and violent, now felt peaceful. His people gathered near, their faces tired but filled with quiet relief. The fight was done. She turned to him, voice trembling. What happens now? We can't go back. He looked at her, his gaze steady. Then we build something new. Here, for him, he glanced at the baby in her arms. He will grow knowing both sides, not as enemies, but as one. She smiled weakly. You really believe that's possible? I do, he said simply. Because you're here. Because we survived when everything said we wouldn't. They stayed in the valley through the night. Fires burned softly among the rocks, and the people sang low songs of victory and mourning. She sat beside him, her head resting on his shoulder, listening to the crackle of flames and the heartbeat of her child. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt safe. As dawn came, light spilled across the land, golden and clean. The rain had washed everything pure again. She stepped out from the camp, holding the baby, watching as the sun rose over the red cliffs. The warrior joined her, silent but close. He pointed toward the horizon where the mountains met the sky. That's where your home once stood, he said softly. She nodded. And it's gone now. He turned to her, smiling faintly. Not gone. Just changed. Like us. She looked at him, feeling the truth in his words. What they had lost was painful beyond words. But what they had gained life, hope. Each other was stronger. The valley had given them more than refuge. It had given them a beginning. The child stirred, his small hand reaching upward toward the light. She kissed his forehead and whispered, You'll never know hate. You'll grow in peace. The warrior placed his hand over hers. He will be the bridge, he said quietly. And through him, both worlds will heal. They stood together as the morning grew brighter, the valley alive with bird song and the scent of new rain. The mountains around them glowed warm with sunlight, her peaks no longer threatening but protective. She leaned into him, her heart full. Thank you, she said. He smiled. For what? For saving me, she replied. Not just my life, but everything I thought was lost. He brushed his thumb over her cheek. You saved me first, he said. You gave me something worth fighting for. The wind swept gently through the valley, carrying away the last echoes of the past. The fires dimmed, the mist lifted, and the sound of the baby's laughter rose into the air soft. Innocent, full of life, and as the sun climbed higher, painting the land gold, they walked together toward the horizon, where the promise of peace waited like a dream finally coming true. The story of their pain would fade with time, but the love they built in its place would live on. Stronger than the storms that once tried to tear them apart, it was not just survival. It was rebirth proof that even in the harshest corners of the old American frontier, hope could still find its way home.